Welcome to Pragmatic Talks, a podcast and video series where we discuss startups, contemporary digital product development, modern technologies, and product management. This episode is brought to you by Pragmatic Coders in collaboration with Agile Example, one of the largest Agile conferences in Europe. We believe that everyone should have equal access to knowledge about product development and entrepreneurship, and also everyone should have the opportunity to apply it in pursuit of making our world a better place. Through this series, we aim to create an impact on the future world. In today's episode, we are joined by Viktor Grgić, an Agile Coach, software developer, and certified LESS trainer with over 25 years of experience. Viktor has coached and trained organizations such as Dutch Chamber of Commerce, Nationale Nederlanden, and BMW. He's also known for writing papers and blogs, as well as giving classes on the subject of IT architecture and Agile. Today, we'll explore LESS framework, Large-Scale Scrum, covering its basics, practical implementation, and unique benefits for scale-ups. Then we'll discuss the challenges and successes of LESS adoption in different cultural contexts, and we'll share some advice for leaders. Lastly, we'll try to predict the future trends in Agile and LESS in the context of AI and other emerging technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Viktor Grgić. Welcome in the next episodes of Pragmatic Talks. Today we are hosting Viktor Grgić, who is a professional LESS trainer, and in today's episode we are going to cover the topic of growing organizations, scaling organization in Agile way in the LESS framework. Today, as you can see, we are again at the Agile by Example conference. Thanks to that event, we have a pleasure to meet here, Viktor. It's a great pleasure. We've been about to record the episode about LESS from some time, and we've been talking in the previous episodes that we need to do that. When I saw your name on the agenda, I thought it would be a great pleasure to have you here. But before we will talk about LESS, let's talk a little bit about you. So, who is Viktor Grgić? What is your story?
So I come originally from Bosnia, and that's where I'm born. I lived in Netherlands for 20 years, and now live in Hong Kong for 10 years. Long time ago, 14 years ago, something like that. And I tried to figure out how to work with the multiple teams doing Scrum and how experiment with that, and found out, actually ended up doing LESS without realizing. And much later I found out from Bas Vodde, who told me, would you like to be a LESS trainer? So that's how I rolled in without even knowing what LESS actually is all about.
Yeah. Actually, I have a similar experience. When I was introduced to LESS a few years ago, I was so obvious this is the way we used to work in the past with with a few teams, and there's nothing special in that. And I was like, but there's so many organizations trying something different that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And the approach that we used to do works. So for me, it was like, hey, this is maybe why I believe in LESS and how LESS works in helping organizations.
Yeah, that's actually, I heard that story now a few times, and I thought about why is that happening? It's actually interesting. Why some ended up with LESS and some ended up with something else. It proves to be that there's a certain understanding of what Scrum is all about that leads to LESS almost naturally, and there's other understanding of what Scrum is about, which doesn't lead to LESS actually.
So tell us a little bit more about it.
To explain it in the most basic way is one group sees Scrum as basically a learning machine. So meaning that the teams are there in order to learn. So learn how to work better, learn what's a good product, is this the thing that we want, and constantly by learning, improving product and themselves. So the output of a team is essentially knowledge. And other group talks more about flow and how to deliver stuff sooner or faster, how to deliver more, and this concept. So they are focusing, you could say, more on delivery or execution. While the first group, the focus is much more on solving the customer problem, and while assuming that we don't know much. And that's also another aspect. One group has tendency, including myself, to assume that we actually don't really know how to do our job properly, and neither the customer knows what they exactly wants. And so you need to kind of figure out how to then work most effectively. Another group makes assumption that we do actually fairly know this. So now we need to focus how to execute upon really efficiently. These two different ways of looking at it, and what's more emphasized, is not necessarily is either or, but what is more emphasized will lead to actually either LESS or something else. That's my theory.
I think that there is a lot of things in your theory that make sense, and yes, but I wonder if the first group, the group that is more focused on the flow on the effectiveness in terms of delivering the scope. If they would start using less, what does it change for them? Like, would they also be as effective, or maybe less is less effective in just delivering the scope?
So it depends very much when they say we want to be able to deliver on the scope faster and so on. And it could mean actually when you introduce less that it feels, it looks actually that it's less fast. That depends on a measurement and what they value, what is measured. So for example, if you measure developer productivity, then less is likely not a good idea. If you measure the outcome productivity, whatever that might mean, so to achieving the outcome, then less does fit and clearly helps, and it doesn't basically contradict or compromises the speed. So it's not like if you do less you need to compromise speed. Absolutely not. What this compromise is what kind of a speed one seeks. Do you want to get to the value to maximize the value as soon as possible? Then less is a good idea. Do you want to deliver as much as possible per developer? Less maybe doesn't fit.
Let's get back to the basics. If you could explain less in less than 2 minutes.
Yeah. So less is essentially a organizational design framework, or you could say organizational system for product development. This is the most essential aspect of it. What you don't hear in there, it's an agile framework. So if you ask an average person what's less, they put it in the same box as safe, etc. The difference is so large that it's incomparable to each other. Because one is, you could be argue it's an agile framework, but it's actually more organizational design framework. Not any organizational design, it's designed for the specific purpose, which is to be able as an organization to focus on the most important, in other words, what has the highest value, and also to reduce the cost of changing direction. So you want to have an organization which is able to constantly reduce that cost of changing direction. That's what specifically is it meant for, not anything else. So if organization wants something else or has goals which do not fit in those goals, then they better don't choose less. So it's not like a solution for everything.
So how is it to work in a company that is organized that way? How does it feel, or how is it different from working in any other company that is not using less, from the perspective of, let's say, software developer, product owner, scrum master, or even any other person in the organization?
Yeah. So actually good that you mentioned different roles, and they experience it differently. Let me explain first a more general thing which everybody experiences. On one hand, especially in the beginning, it's a lots of pain and confusion. So that's lots of conflicts also over a bit longer period of time. Conflict basically on every level. So this sounds quite negative. I'll get to explain why that happens. So most less adoptions come from a setup where the people never actually been in a real team, and meaning that there is a very high level of collaboration. So suddenly this context, which is basically really pushing from every side to start to behave as a real team, and people learn that for the first time, and they need to learn how to collaborate, which logically creates a situation where the conflicts start to exist. And this is usually good, and usually I actually encourage people to end up in a conflict, especially in Asia, which is a bit harder, but they need to obviously resolve. And so also management needs to really work as a team, because normally in organization, everything is kind of divided and people follow process. As long as you don't touch my area, I want to not touch yours. And we are best friends, we drink beer or whatever. But now this totally changes, which forces people to really share their ownership and responsibility and so on. But this requires a much higher level of trust, which hasn't been built yet. To simplify, if you want high level of collaboration, there has to be also a high level of trust. The trust doesn't come falling out of the sky. It has to be built up over time. On the other side, what we also see a lot is this bubbling of energy. So when you see them just normally in the office or even online, where there is a seemingly chaotic stuff happening, everybody's talking to each other seemingly across different teams. So nobody's really seemingly stuck into their own team. It's kind of like a very, very confusing situation. But what matters at the end of the day, stuff gets done really fast. And the integrated product is done by the end of the sprints. Because the reason why it's so chaotic is because everybody's trying to doing everything possible to get stuff done, not wait on each other, not send a document and wait until somebody reacts, etc. So this is really nice to see. This very high level of energy, lots of friendship, lots of work activities.
You said something that sounded a little bit, it's like a very brave statement, but I totally agree with that. And I share the observation that you had, that many people have never ever experienced working in a team. If you tell us around the answer and like explain a little bit more, what do you consider as a team and what is just a group of people who are working on something? Like, what's the difference between team and the group? And as I said, I have the same observation as a person who used to work in teams, real teams. As you said, a lot of friendship happened. I still have my best friends with whom I was working in one of my first agile teams that I ever participated as a software developer or QA. I'm still like in contact with all of these people, and we were a team, and I'm not seeing it as often as I would like to in the modern companies.
Yeah. So the same for me. The difference between a team and a group of people and other forms is so what typically happens when we call a team, there is some kind of a shared management, or so there is we report into the same manager, and a group of people which essentially serves the same purpose, meaning that laid out by the manager or which manager has. But they're essentially working on their own tasks. They have their own roles, and they help each other. And so I'm doing my stuff, you're doing your stuff. I help each other. People call this often a team, unless we don't consider this as team. The real team is when I wake up in the morning and I go to work with a purpose to deliver the objective, the goal, what the team has, whatever that might be. I don't care which task I'm doing and that I'm completing my task. What I care about, whether as a whole team we are achieving what we ought to achieve. My whole position as my job at the work is to actually ensure that I contribute, that my whole team is successful. Very concretely, how you notice that is how they discuss the progress. So if my teammate is stuck with something, I feel responsible that he is stuck or she is stuck. So there's an equal responsibility for me. Despite I might not even know what they are doing, I do feel the same responsibility. So to give you a bit of idea.
It's a really good clarification on what the team is. I also remember, I just recall stories when I, as a QA and as a tester in the team, I've seen, for example, that we are missing some front-end development jobs, like adding some styles, CSS styles to some admin panel that we created for a client. And I said, okay, so I see you are too busy to do that. I will learn CSS and I will do that and then you will tell me if I'm doing it right or not. I've learned a lot. That was the first, maybe not the first time, but yeah, the first time I actually learned how to code the front end, and thanks to that, I later on I became coding a little bit more. That was also that feeling that I'm part of the team. We have a goal to actually deliver this admin panel, deliver some functionality to the product or some value to our clients and go to production in the next few days. And I seen that there is no room for that, so I stepped in and did it. And that was a situation that happened very, very often in our team. And everyone did that in the past, like from any angle, any role. Like we were able to move in and step out from the comfort zone even. Okay, so what about the product management in this? How does it look like?
I need to explain first how we see product management as a definition of what product management means in that. So product management can mean different things in a general community, such as there is a discovery aspect of the product, there is a coordination, there is ensuring that the teams are actually doing stuff or what they ought to be doing, and combining all this kind of stuff. So in less, it's not like that. Coordination is not done by product management, it's done by the teams. So to simplify, lots of stuff which typically product managers do, especially if you have many of them, is actually done by the teams, such as coordination, such as actually figuring out even which features to build. So that might be very surprising. So that might be also decided by a product owner. And so product management role doesn't exist, but you could actually kind of say, okay, so what do you then have in place? A product owner. So product owner obviously can say, I want these features, but it's actually very, very common. And it happens especially in a more advanced or developed less adoptions that the teams are actually suggesting the features. Very, very normal. And even exploration with and discovery part, that's actually also collaboration between product owner and the teams. So for example, product owners say, can put in a backlog item, please figure out what's the struggle with this type of a customer. That's an item in a backlog, and normal feature team can actually engage in that. Having said that, there is also a bit of a reality check. Before you get to that point what I just explained, it takes a while. Product owner typically has sometimes people who help with these kind of activities, and they are sometimes called product managers. And what kind of help? Doing some kind of a market research, which feature teams typically, I've never seen it happening. So especially if it's some deep market research, engaging with some stakeholders, because the stakeholders are not into maybe engaging directly with the team, and they require high maintenance, and they need to be dealt with. Product management as a knowledge area is extremely important. So all the typical techniques that the product management has, they are very much embraced in the lesson concepts, such as impact mapping, story mapping, product vision boards, and so on and on. So this is very much embraced.
So what about UX?
UX doesn't mean having a specialist at UX or
specialists are performing the actions, such as you already mentioned, like a market research, which I consider somewhere between product management and user experience research, and then of course UX research, interviewing customers, collecting data, surveys, etc., and then designing, of course, at the end. But this is just the end of the process, not the.
Yeah, it's basically similar answer to what indeed you kind of touched upon, because it's in a similar area of product ownership, and meaning that teams are often engaged in this kind of activities. In previous structure, there was UX people, and those commonly go into the teams. They drive this kind of activities, so they are the ones most active with that. But then they have a huge benefit of being in a team, meaning that whenever there is some kind of a research requires experimentation, you can immediately leverage on that, because it's just an item in the backlog which says research, but actual research, meaning experiments, try something out. And so you can do that. So this is one way that it happens. But if the less adoption is not so advanced, let's say, then you have then more people then supporting product owner, which are then dedicated doing that. So because the team is not in a scale of the capability, it hasn't grown yet in order to incorporate these kind of activities yet.
Okay. So one more thing about the product management. You said a few times only one person, one product owner.
Yes.
How one person could, for example, manage a product backlog or manage, the product for 10 teams or 12 teams?
Yeah.
You already mentioned that there are some supporting roles that organization could implement into their structure, but how would you answer that question? Like how to manage a huge number of teams?
So generally those supporting people are not involved in managing the product backlog. That's pretty much always a smell, meaning that the things haven't changed. So those people which are supporting the product owner, they are more providing this information from talking to stakeholders or some kind of a research. And then they bring in this information, but the actual product backlog is managed in predominantly by the teams. So product owner job is also partly to manage the backlog, but the product owner doesn't go into the details of items. He's really looking on the impact of each item and the context of each item. So the details are provided and managed essentially by the teams. That's why unless we have up to a full day refinement in a 2-week sprint, because this is not a minor work. This probably
is pretty the same in Scrum actually, like the proportion, the suggested proportion, at least in the previous version of Scrum guides, and that suggested it was like 10% of the sprint, which is 1 day.
Yeah, it's just in the Scrum, there's not a mandated meeting, while in the less is a dedicated meeting that you have every sprint. What probably sounds maybe a bit shocking to audience, like how in Earthflame can teams do that, especially if you have a whole bunch of teams. Like if you have so many people responsible for it, then nobody's responsible. That's a typical saying. So what we do is divide being responsible, which are all the teams, versus the actual working agreements. How do you do that? So there is a whole range of facilitation techniques to make sure this is done really efficiently and fast. In a matter of one meeting in different working groups, they're working on the same backlog to refine it very effectively. So it goes really fast.
One of our product managers, product owners, once said that backlog refinement is like meditation. You should meditate at least once per day, unless you don't have time. If you don't have time for meditating once a day, you need to meditate at least twice. And I believe it's the same with the refinement. Like when people are struggling with refinement and having not time for that, they should do this at least 1 day. But if they don't have time, they should to this more time, more and more.
Yeah.
And it's the same.
Common remark to that is that, even more meetings and longer meetings. And who loves meetings? Nobody loves meetings. That's something that we encounter, especially in the beginning of less adoptions. Previously, people have experience of these long, ineffective meetings and stuff. And then you end up in a less situation. Suddenly, you also need to do refinement, and it's a one bloody hell long meeting. So they kind of like, what's going to happen here? And also in the beginning, refinements are not so efficient because people are still getting used to it. So this is a bit of a hurdle. I've noticed now a pattern after seeing so many groups of flipping of teams that in the first few sprints, there's always a complaining about the refinement until they figure out how to do it properly. And then nobody's even questioning it. They already see it really important part of the process that has to be done.
If we would have someone here who is growing his or her company, like startup owner, founder who is, just raised another round of financing and is going to grow from, let's say, 30 people to 80, 90 people in the IT, in the product department. How would you convince such a person, or what benefits of using Less you would provide to convince such a person in 2 minutes or something, that elevator pitch?
Yeah, my first question always would be, why would you want to scale?
So I would provide you an answer that is not so obvious, but I heard it recently for real.
Yeah.
Because my investor told me so, otherwise they won't give me money.
Yeah.
So, that happens.
Yes. So at least I want to have the answer. Unfortunately, you can never confirm. The answer is usually not very good one.
Yeah.
And so you can fight it, or you can just simply say, okay, then, so need to deal with that. And in a way, that's also one of the reasons why Less exists. It's not because it's so great to scale, but because everybody's scaling and now how to manage that properly. And so scaling is clearly a need, and Less kind of fits in how do we scale more sensibly, essentially. Despite that, we don't want to, they shouldn't be scaled most of the time. Not long time ago is a company which has scaled really fast, Jago in Indonesia. I want to do a talk tomorrow on it. They scale really fast. And but first they scaled or tried to scale without Less, and basically a kind of a Spotify thing, with independent teams and stuff, and everybody has their own product owner, etc. So that really didn't work out. When we came with Less, it became a very obvious choice, and so it became scaling very clear. With the clear messages, if you want to scale up, the last thing what you want to do is complicate the hell out of everything. So you don't want to complicate your company. Nobody wants that, actually.
Let's talk about transformation that you already mentioned. Like I have this observation, and I've seen it a few times, that introducing Less to the organization is difficult, is time-consuming, is cost-consuming, etc. And they struggle with it. But I also seen and talked to people who are saying that, no, it's pretty easy. It's just, you're just adding on the top what we have. As I said, one day refinement, like one product owner, one single backlog, and actually we are doing Less. We don't need to do anything else. And it was like a one-day transformation, and we are Less. Yeah. The difference between those two groups is that the second one is already using Scrum and is doing this properly, and just simply added one another team, and then put a Less on top of that, and it worked seamlessly. Yeah. And the first group is that they are not doing Scrum at all, or they are doing Scrum, but Scrum-ish something. They are not having a proper Scrum process there, and they are trying to scale it up. Yeah. So do you think that Scrum is something that is mandatory for Less adoption, or maybe there is, maybe you have some examples of companies that were totally not using Scrum and then adopted Less for their...
Unfortunately, I wasn't lucky to encounter a company which does Scrum properly, that I just simply put the stuff on top and that it's kind of easy. In my case, pretty much all of them were not easy at all.
Maybe because you're a consultant and trainer, and those companies who, did this seamlessly, they didn't simply need your help. Yeah,
exactly. So if you do it properly, you don't need Less. Yeah. So I kind of just end up there. I don't emphasize much Scrum in the beginning, and organizations, meaning that pretty much all of them that I encounter don't understand Scrum properly. So many of them claim to do Scrum, and in reality it proves to be not Scrum at all, and Scrumish, as we call it. Do I then first start teaching them Scrum and stuff? No, really. And why? Because there is an interdependence between doing Scrum properly and how organization is structured. So problem is, as long as you don't change an organization, it's in many organizations impossible to do Scrum properly. And that's why the existence of less, and that's why it's organizational design framework. The whole purpose of Scrum is to expose the pain so that you deal with it. The problem is that exposing the pain for whatever reason doesn't work. It's not good enough. And so it needs more. So that's why we have organizational tools, lean thinking, systems thinking, to essentially break the barriers to enable this real agility to happen. Now, can we have organization without actually doing Scrum in general then? Is less meant to kind of always implement Scrum, but then on scale? No, actually there are less adoptions which don't actually use almost anything from Scrum. And I in my also less adoption that I do, I really de-emphasize the Scrum rules and Scrum guides, and so we don't emphasize that at all. We just simply start working with the teams and very often deviate from the Scrum rules. And so there are some teams, some people suggest also continuous flow, for example, and I very much encourage. The only but there is when they say continuous flow, I really want to know what the heck do they mean, because it's very often avoiding the pain and change, and that's not really an option. So because the purpose is to get better.
Don't you think it's all about product management that we discussed before? Like the organizations who are really product centric and designed that way, or trying to be designed that way, have like a much easier to adapt to less, because if they already have like a strong product management, managers, decision makers, and this culture of the product centric, of focusing on the users and delighting them by the product, it's actually a common route for the less and the products in the organization. And the same for the Scrum organization. Like a good Scrum organization, Scrum teams need to have this product management in place, otherwise they will be stopped from doing the Scrum as it's supposed to be. In the best case scenario, they will deliver the scope in the group that you at the very beginning described, that they are using Scrum for delivering the scope. But if they are product centric, they will deliver value instead of the scope. So like the best thing I love in less is how less deal with the dependencies. And this is the question I often get from various people who are working for big organizations, trying to do some Scrum, Agile, and they are asking all the time, okay, how to deal with dependencies, and they are wasting a lot of time on that. They are hiring special dependency managers, release train managers, whatever, who are nothing else but trying to solve the dependencies, predict all the dependencies, put all the, mark them, visualize them, and then figure out how to do this. How you do that in less?
Okay. The dependencies are embraced, in fact. So we don't mind dependencies. We love dependencies in less. So that's the first thing. And so dependencies are not a problem, because if you do not have a dependency, that means that you do not integrate. Why do we have dependencies? Because different parts need to integrate. What's the problem is not dependencies, but the cost of them. So unless we do everything possible to reduce the cost of those dependencies. Now, if you have somebody separate, so it means that you have a level of indirection. So there is somebody separate who needs to manage dependencies, means that that somebody doesn't understand how this dependency really comes about, is managing more. So it has a problem, typical management problem. If you're outside of the development, then you don't understand the details. You'd have a big picture, but don't see the details. And so if you're inside and looking locally, then you see the details, but don't see the big picture. And so this is what creates waste. This is what it makes so painful to have a dependency. And so instead, we change the structure in such that we reduce the cost of dependencies massively. Hence, the people who have to depend on each other, they are simply put together. And so in order to deliver a value for the customer, you need to go through different components. You need to have a certain skills. And so you put those people together and you build knowledge required in order to do that. So dependencies are shifted, essentially. And so the most of dependencies happen then within a team. Now, did we solve now cross-team dependencies? No, we did reduce a lot. And so for the remaining part, for dependencies across different teams, that happens directly by the team. So that's a second form of waste. If you, again, level of indirection, if you have somebody separate, that's very costly. But if you have the teams directly coordinate with each other, this reduces the cost of coordination or dependencies between teams.
And to make it happen, you need to manage these dependencies on the backlog So they will be put together so people will actually not blocking each other and that more likely work in parallel on something that is interdependent to each other.
Yeah,
correct.
That's actually interesting. On the backlog, you generally don't see actually dependencies.
Because you have features there, or you have like a user stories, whatever that have some dependencies inside.
Exactly.
But actually, since those are like a big chunks that are put there together and are not splitted, so this team will take that and the other team will take another part, but not today, but in the next couple of sprints. Then you actually don't need to manage those dependencies because they will figure out how to solve it in this sprint.
That's correct. So that's actually really good and also quite shocking thing to people is like because it's very, very common, even in less adoptions, people miss this point often, is in order to, if you have 3 items which depend on each other, so they have a tendency to plan one item by one team in one sprint, second one is second, third, and third one. We really discourage this because this is actually creating a delay, which is another waste and lots of complications back and forth, etc. So instead we encourage, put it all 3 in the same sprint. And it's very counterintuitive, but this actually reduces the dependency cost enormously by actually depending on each other even more. That's why we love dependencies. And now we're not depending on across 3 sprints, but you're depending every single day, every hour.
You need to communicate, you need to figure it out how to do this. But people on the other side have time for you because they have the common goal, the same goal that you have. So it's much easier for people to communicate. And of course, for some people, it may sound counterintuitive, because when you look at it, it occurs that, okay, but there are a few other items that are not dependent from this one that sounds to be more important, and that team that is working on this part could do that at the same time instead of doing this dependent part. But at the end of the day, when you count all of this dependencies, dependency management, time needed, all of this blocking each other, etc., it occurs that everyone is way more effective. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but actually the data shows that works better, and the logic shows it.
There's also another reason, is in the beginning when I mentioned what is less meant for, the purpose of less is to focus on the most important. Now, if an organization chooses for that, many do, some don't, that means they're serious about it. They want to focus on the most important. If we say because of dependencies, you are going to pick up in the meantime something else and stuff, you can logically deduct that you will be less focusing on the most important automatically. Everybody optimizes to utilize their time, which means that everybody starts to wait on each other, being very busy. So the consequence of that is that the most important is going to be delayed because now we're working not on a single thing, what's most important, we're working on many things.
And there's the concept of the slack time, that even if you cannot participate in working in something that is most important right now, you shouldn't be, just simply running in a circle and trying to do anything else, but you should even be available for others in the case they will need you. Or work on something that is not, you can improve quality, you can learn something new, you can experiment with some new technology, etc. That is quite good, and that's why I think it's pretty the same in the Scrum, not only in the LS, but all the concept of slack time is pretty universal, and whatever framework you use, if you have it in place, it works in Kanban as well. Okay, you are working with different levels of organizations. You're working in management, with product management, with teams. So do you have like a different approaches to all of these levels? Like, do you talk differently or use different techniques to work with the top level management of the company, or it's pretty the same tools as you work with a development team?
They are variations of the same thing. So meaning that all 3 groups go essentially through the same training, 3-day training at least. Management goes through a longer training, but it's usually not called training. We call it a workshop for political reasons. People don't like to be trained; they want to work. I don't know. So that meaning that with the management there is like a regular sessions, and every 2 weeks or every month, and so we take a subject and go very deep on the subject, etc. So how information is presented really depends on audience, and even actually per company and type of people actually sitting there. So teams which are heavily technical, and so you typically need to emphasize more how to collaborate better and stuff. But teams who are not so technical, you need to emphasize much more technical excellence practices. Same with the management. Lots of management, especially the highest level, which is actually then outside of the technical management, so management of IT, but actually management of, let's say, a bank. They just don't know so much about product development. So then you really need to educate even about the product development. Like it's not like building a building outside. It's actually a very different beast, software. So it's soft, you can change anytime. So they assume you cannot change, therefore you need to do upfront stuff and so on and so on. So it's really basic stuff sometimes.
So since we are talking about learning, teaching people, etc., let's talk a bit about the role of the Scrum Master in LeSS. So how does it look like? Is it different from regular Scrum Master in the regular Scrum team? What's the difference?
So the Scrum Master in Scrum and Scrum Master in LeSS is in essence not different. But due to the context within which they're working, a manifestation can be very different. Because in LeSS you're working, usually you're looking very much also how collaboration between teams are happening. And while in Scrum, his assumption is that you're mainly focusing how that team is working and producing value. So there is organizational context by definition for Scrum Masters. And so it's just that in the Scrum, there's so many interpretations of not in Scrum itself, but people make all kinds of interpretations what Scrum Master ought to be doing, and in LeSS we make it much more specific and much more clear, and in order to avoid this kind of issues. And so the most visible difference in practical sense is that. Scrum Master in LeSS is very much encouraged to be deeply knowledgeable about technical excellence, technical practices. It's basically somebody who's technically really good and teaching.
Okay. So that's the question aside of the LeSS. But for example, at Pragmatic Talks, where we work, we do have Scrum Masters, but those are not full-time jobs. This is just a role of a developer who wanted to take this accountability and play the role of a Scrum Master in a team. We teach those people, we train them like they are. I would say that most of them will easily pass PSM1 Scrum certificate exam without any preparation. So they have this knowledge. And what do you think if such a person taking this role as a part-time or on the top of the regular development duties, how would such a person work in LeSS framework? Would it work, or maybe it's too much for such?
Yeah, it's too much simply.
Okay.
It has to do with just simply amount of required work. It's a difference between taking continuous improvement really seriously as an organization versus somebody who does it aside. And so pretty much always what I observe when a Scrum Master is a part-time, it's usually ends up to be then some kind of somebody who manages basically the backlog and meetings or
that's a team.
Sorry?
That's the team's responsibility, not the Scrum Master.
Yeah. But in reality, they kind of I see these activities happening by Scrum Master. They're planning the meetings. It's a superficial. It's done superficially. So when it comes to improvement and making sure they're facilitating the meetings also, that happens also. So that part-time Scrum Master. So it's always the one that facilitates the meetings. Unless we encourage basically anybody in the team to facilitate. So typically these activities that are picked up by these part-time Scrum Masters, they should be actually picked up by the team. But then what Scrum Master actually going to do needs to really do deep thinking and observation and looking at organizational issues, what's actually blocking the team, and teaching them, introducing all this kind of a new way of working, pairing up also with them to teach them all these practices in order to really improve.
Let's focus a little bit on the future. And how do you think that the things will change in the nearest future in terms of the scalability, LeSS, and especially in context of AI? Since I think that AI will simplify the developer's job pretty soon. and will reduce the complexity or will address the complexity of the complex systems that people created, and will simplify it one way or another, or even make it more complex, but make it manageable, because people won't be changing the code, but the AI will do, and people maybe will tell only how to change it. Sooner or later that will happen, I'm pretty sure. So how do you imagine the nearest, or maybe not the nearest, but the future of AI combined with the scaling organization? Or maybe there won't be a scaling organization issue because the number of people won't mean anything.
Less is actually, it feels almost by designed for AI future. I'll come to the AI aspect just to explain what it means to be a developer in a less context. It means that as your job is not anymore coding. Your job is actually to solving customer problem. And anything that is required in order to solve the customer problem, you do that. And as we know, this is a small part of that is coding, essentially. So this is a dramatic difference, and typically less adoptions is a struggle for developers. Now we go to AI. What is AI about? Is AI actually going to replace a developer? No, of course not. As long as we see developers I just mentioned, somebody who solves the customer problem. AI is not going to solve the customer problem, because the most important things there is asking the right questions, etc., and understanding, empathy, and so on and so on. So the context. AI is not good at all. AI is going to actually speed up this development from somebody who's actually doing repetitive routine work, routine knowledge, exercising routine knowledge. So routine knowledge is going to disappear, meaning I know how to code this function in a language, blah, blah, blah. So that will largely disappear. And which means that what remains is that you're really focusing on customer problem thing. And so it actually is going to speed up that development where we're going. I mean, that developer job is not going to be replaced at all. It just means that the job is going to change dramatically.
How about the product management? I'm pretty sure that this is something that still need to be required. Product management, like all of this aspect of interviewing users, etc., asking the right questions, as you mentioned.
So the previous point that I made is actually largely Craig Lahman also held a talk on it, and a very detailed one at LESS conference. So he explained this in enormous detail, so I would advise to check it out. And but almost pretty much all roles are going to be affected in the same way. So let's say like UX. Okay, so UX, what a typical UX does, and I spend most of the time, is they create or a product manager in that sense also up to a certain level. So they create these in a Figma these designs and so on, and they have an idea, and then they spend time creating these designs. Now, the most time spent actually on creating those designs. And now there's already AI, which they can do that in a matter of 10 seconds. So just put an idea, if you don't like it, change the idea, produce a high definition.
I've seen it once that you put a mock-up on the napkin, and you provide the picture, and you already have a design in the way that you want it. Or you can describe it, you can do like a block schema of the functionalities that you want. And you not only have a design, but also the code that is behind of it, and all the functions. So you don't need to know how to code and how to design to actually do this job. But there is this job of collecting the feedback, talking to the users, finding their problems that we can address, solving that. And I believe that this is something that, at least right now, I haven't seen an AI for that.
Yeah, that's true. Because the change of a developer job is then dramatically happening. Developer is automatically going to be closer and closer to customer. And this means, what does it mean? It means actually exactly those activities that you just mentioned. Collecting the feedback, understanding the customer, observing how they actually use the work, and so on and so on.
Let's talk a little bit about the cultural differences. And especially in terms of the scaling companies. You already mentioned before that in Asia, it's much harder to put people in the conflict in the team to actually build a team. So what are other differences that you see between, let's say, Europe, Netherlands, and Asia, that Hong Kong that you work right now?
Very few things I could say it's an Asian thing. So Asia is basically full of very diverse countries with all different cultures and stuff. And the difference is, the more time I spend there, the bigger differences I notice. And but there is one more kind of a general thing in most of Asian countries, is that the embracing change is more welcomed than in this part of the world. Generalize a bit, but it's actually based on experience. In Netherlands, when you to take in a country, but it's I think other European countries is similar. In Germany, is same and so on. So when you go in a company and say, "Hey, shall we do this? Let's try this," and the immediate question back is, "Why should we? What's wrong with our current way of working?" It's something that in Asia rarely ever happens. So so the resistance to try things out is very, very low. And so that's something which kind of like very much complements the Agile way of experimentation working. So Agile typical less adoptions go faster in Asia than do here.
That's interesting. Is there anything that is more difficult in Asia, aside of you already said that team building through the conflict, but maybe there are some other aspects that you see that are different and more difficult to...
Yeah, the team building thing is actually not necessarily because people don't want to or anything culturally. It's actually because of the more systemic things that the people are never used to, never learned to actually work in a team. Why is that? Is a hierarchical nature of work and in a country. So this in combination with a certain type of a respect to authority, and so somebody higher in authority is considered smarter. And I literally also heard people saying like, "Oh, why should we ask or let the team decide? Because we have these managers who are by definition smarter, otherwise they wouldn't be managers." And so, which is somebody from Europe sounds quite astonishing statement. And it's also not a very common statement, but because to hear publicly, but I do know it's actually in the minds of the people, like there is this kind of like a hierarchy. And this obviously contradicts the self-management up to a certain level. Does it mean it can then kind of give up? No. Because at the end of the day, everybody also pretty much everybody also in Asia sees the benefit of self-management. Is they are not against it or not, that they just haven't seen it happening often. So when you show that it's possible, there's a direct embracement of that. So I usually don't try to convince to do self-management. We just do it because remember they're embracing the change. I don't need to explain much. We just simply do it and then show them how it looks like. And then if you, it's actually working.
Okay, so let's talk about your case studies, success stories especially. So could you name like one greatest success of the transformation that you led or you helped with and give us some more details about it?
One of them. Okay, so the more recent one is this Jago.
Spoiler for the 2 hours talk.
Yeah, maybe not. Okay, so
no worries. No worries. So like people will see this recording like a few weeks after the conference. So yeah. But you can already, most probably you will already could find the Agile by Example YouTube channel and all of the talks from this year conference, including Viktor's talk that he will speak about here before the talk. So you can compare if that was the same talk or not. So
yeah. So Jago, the reason why I like it is because it has this combination of a difficulty that typically we encounter. And so I also can talk about Port of Rotterdam, but this was a smaller in scale, and there was a kind of like a perfect storm and easier to kind of get on with it a long time ago. That was my most enjoyable thing because it was ended up so good. Jago is a bank in a fairly traditional culture. And so my friends in Indonesia are going to forgive me when I mention this, they agree. So it's a very hierarchical way of working where people are expected to execute tasks as they're being assigned to, preferably through Jira. And so they, and then you talk about scaling and talk about lots of people and changing that into real self-managing teams where people who are normally very shy and don't talk much and so on, really open up. And also multicultural. So there's people from Indonesia with different religious backgrounds also, and then Singapore, and then Eastern Europe also actually quite a few, and they're working together. And we ended up in really saving the company. So because before the change, there was such a huge stress that they're not going to make it because they just couldn't get stuff done properly. And in this market, if you are not fast enough with a properly delivered stuff, you're dead. And so it's a scaling thing, virtual bank, competing with others. and they really turn around completely. And with now, I don't know, number of teams, I forgot, 30 teams something. Sure.
Awesome. That sounds great. Okay, so last but not least, like if you could share, say 3 top advices that you would give to any organizational leader who want to start introducing less to their company, where they should start from.
The number one thing, surprisingly, has nothing to do with less, but simply being aware of and asking yourself a question, what exactly am I optimizing for? And that proves to be always a surprising question to the management. They don't have a very clear answer. And so the conversation is usually like, I want an Agile coach, I want this Agile thing, but that doesn't really mean anything. And and what do you optimize for? The first step after that, once you realize less actually might be a way to help you to actually solve your problem or optimize what you need to optimize for, then do a training for management. And so that management is fully educated before you understand what you're getting yourself into, because less adoptions are painful. After that, typical step is choosing one group with which to start. And it doesn't mean that you decided to start and do feature teams. It means that group that gets educated. And then again, you need to decide the group themselves, including the team members, developers, everybody, need to decide, is this something for us? Do we understand actually what it is? Do we understand how it's going to make a difference? And are we willing to go through the pain of a change, because it's not minor? And once they decided, then we do we call a flip, which is typically a 5-day activity of doing several things in order to be completely ready with a new structure, where you then start a first sprint. Now, after that, you're not finished. After that, another pain begins, because now we need to get used to this way of working, and then continuously improve sprint after sprint. So I explained more than 3 things.
Yeah, and that was, so I was about to ask another bonus question about how does the transformation look like? You already told us about the beginning.
Yeah.
So you're saying that then it's just a continuous improvement, sprint after sprint. You are introducing new concept or next concepts of less, and improving the.
Yeah, so essentially is improving the definition of done, which actually at some point requires organizational improvement. Give an example. One team, they cannot do full end-to-end integration testing. Why? Because one of the tools is basically developed by a different part of the company, or one of the components is a different part of the company, or by vendor, and then you need to do organizational change again in order to incorporate that also, and which is part of being able to expand the definition of done.
So case by case, you're changing the organization structure to fit it into the proper dependency management that we spoke about before.
Yes, to reduce the cost of those dependencies.
Okay,
and
makes sense.
So it means that what I explained is
the big bang organization change up front is later step by step adjusting the organization structure to the process that we want to follow.
That's correct. So essentially, no matter the size of organization, the group that you're starting with is a fairly small, up to 50 people, not more than that. And then also the change, even for that group, you're not saying now, regardless of the complexity of architecture, you need to work end-to-end through all the components. No, that might be just way too much. So you say you become, for the first step, more cross-component. So you don't want to overstretch organizations. No big bang at all. So that might, quite many people I hear this misunderstanding. They're thinking less is this kind of like a big bang idealistic thing, where you change the whole organization, then you can start working. No, it doesn't work like that. So you do a small group, and not some kind of a changing completely into end-to-end teams, because it might be too difficult. Cross-component, and then gradually sprint by sprint, expanding that further.
I wouldn't ask the question, how long does it take to transform organization, because most probably it's like continuous process that never ends. But like after what time you think that the organizational leaders or organization at all see the first results of adopting this way of working?
Yeah, so it's a contextual. But usually what you see is between 1 and 2 years, you start to see real difference. But this assumes it's a less huge when they finish, which in my case, but almost always is less huge. The reason why it's less huge is because it's a larger organization. And So this is usually also a bit more complex. It takes a bit more time. I had a changes which took only several months, and they saw a difference immediately. But that was just less with a few teams, the whole company. It's
I know that for people who work for a smaller company and never worked in a corporate, like oh my God, 2 years of seeing the results is a long time. No, for the corporates, it's actually extremely fast. Yeah, since starting some project and seeing the results after 2 years or 1 year is actually pretty fast. And as you mentioned, for the small organization, it's usually much faster.
Yeah. Again, it's contextual. So if I would take like one of the biggest banks, I also worked in one of them, and 2 years is too short. It's because of the bureaucracy and stuff, etc.
Okay, Viktor, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to talk about last that I was about to talk about it with someone who was an expert for a very long time. I'm very grateful that you agreed to join us today and that we managed to have this conversation. So once again, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for watching this. And please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and of course follow Viktor also in the LinkedIn. I believe it's the best way. You are pretty active there. Yeah. So it's the best way to also contact you in case someone will have some questions or would like to work together maybe with you. And of course, I invite you to watch the video recording from Agile by Example that will be made tomorrow during your talk and will be released in a couple of months. I don't know exactly when, but you should follow Agile by Example conference social media as well to learn that. So thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Pragmatic Talks is delivered to you by Pragmatic Coders, the first choice software development partners for startup founders. Be sure to catch all new episodes. Subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast channels. And if you are thinking about building your own startup or struggling with product development, contact us and find out what we can do together.